Hi, thanks for joining me. Kirsty here, author of If, founder of the If Crowd. This is a little introduction to Hermetic Principles. This is one of my favorite areas of mystery school philosophies that we work with to aid our manifestation and our transformation. So let's take a look. The Hermetic Principles come from an area of philosophy known as Hermeticism, and this is attributed to a legendary figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, which literally means Hermes, the thrice great magician. Now, Hermes Trismegistus isn't necessarily a real person from history, although some people argue that he was. He's generally considered to be an amalgamation of wisdom teachers, of mystics, of the sages of the ancient worlds. And he's kind of thought to be an amalgamation, a distillation of the god Hermes of Greece and Thoth or Tot of ancient Egypt. And there's references to both in both cultures and many others as well. But here he is depicted in an engraving from the Renaissance era. And that's quite important because it was in the Renaissance when Hermetic philosophy, along with other areas of the mystery schools, started to become popularized again. This was largely because of wealthy families such as the Medicis, who had a lot of wealth and influence in terms of religion and banking in Europe. They became very fascinated by Hermetic teachings and invested a lot of money in it. And a lot of the artwork that we get from the Renaissance actually shows this as well. So we find that there's lots of encoded Hermetic meaning in the work of, say, Leonardo da Vinci, for example. Think of the Vitruvian Man as a key example there. So what is Hermeticism? So Hermeticism is really the application of Hermetic philosophy. As I've mentioned, it goes back to Hermes Trismegistus, and it's a form of metaphysics, but it's the practical metaphysics. It's the knowledge of how to actually apply it in your life. And this is why Hermeticism is also known as alchemy. It's alchemy of the souls. It's about the journey, the process of personal transformation. It's all about seeking gnosis, which means to seek knowledge. And it's not a surprise then that Gnosticism, which we get from the word gnosis, also relates back to Hermeticism too. There are lots of overlaps, lots of parallels, and Gnosticism, of course, is the ancient mystical form of Christianity. The corpus hermeticus is really the wider work of the philosophy. And to study this would be multiple huge volumes of deep encoded metaphysical, metaphorical, almost like cryptic philosophy. This would really take a whole lifetime in itself. Right at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a book released called the Kybalion. And this was like a distillation of Hermetic wisdom, and it distilled it down to 7 main principles, which is what we're going to look at today. Now, the Kybalion is authored mysteriously by 3 initiates. And when you read into the history of this and why this is so, when it was published, the people who had put it together considered themselves to be students, to be scholars of Hermeticism, of mystery school wisdom, and didn't want to take attribution for themselves because they didn't feel they were the authors. They felt that they were merely the channels, the vessels through which this knowledge was in fact being sort of simplified and re-represented for a modern era. And this is one of the things about the mystery schools, when you really get into the detail of them, is that for so long they've been kept in this kind of mystifying, apocryphal way where, it's very, very hard to penetrate the meaning and understanding. It's thought to be very secret. But actually, the mystery schools have evolved with time so that more and more people can access them. And I feel like that's very much my mission in my life, is to be a channel for that, to reach more people with practical metaphysics, how to apply the mystery schools, cutting edge psychology, consciousness research. It's all here. It's science. It's the new paradigm of science that's emerging now. It all comes back, it all dovetails into these ancient teachings. And that's why I'm here today. And one more thing, just on this image here on the left, you might recognize this. This is a symbol that's often used on the side of ambulances, or the side of, prescription bags. It's used as a sign of medicine. It's ancient and it is completely contemporary at the same time. It's known as the caduceus, or the staff of Hermes. And up the center, we have the staff, the main sort of pillar, if you like, going from the earth upwards. And there are always two serpents entwining. Now, many people maybe draw the allegory here to DNA, the double helix. And in the ancient terms, there's real alchemical meanings for this. You may recognize it as well in other mystery schools, so the Kundalini energy rising. And the general idea is that transformation and manifestation kind of come in stages. They come in these waves, they come in this correspondence, as you'll see in the principles, and it goes from the base upwards towards the crown, up towards the gold sort of sphere here at the top, symbolizing the divine. The wings, of course, represent freedom, they represent consciousness, they represent being unbounded. And there's so much more to this, and we'll come on to these in perhaps other sessions as well. One thing that's interesting to note is that these serpents are often found in different cultures, and they hint towards the placement of the pineal gland in the brain. And this is a gland that is responsible for an awful lot of what we might consider to be our experience of consciousness itself, including responding to light and our sleep-awake cycle and so many other things. So as I've mentioned before, a lot of this came out of the Italian Renaissance and had a huge, huge influence on the artwork of the time. So if you really are an art history buff, really look at the works of Da Vinci, of Michelangelo, of what was going on in Europe at that particular time period, and really look into the symbolism, the multiple layers that are there. And this is an example, here's an engraving, and in here you can see so many nods to things that we know today, but also nods to things that are more ancient than we might come to realize, such as the tree of life here, the tree of knowledge. There's a cosmology represented on the tree. You might recognize some of those symbols as pertaining to zodiac and other symbology as well. We have the Aquila, we have the phoenix, we have a peacock. These are all avian symbols of regeneration, of rebirth, of eternal life. We have the root of the tree right at the bottom of the picture, sort of depicting a pathway up toward the heavens and beyond, right up to the name of God there at the top in Hebrew. And there's a mix of Latin and Hebrew going on here as well, which again is a nod to the ancient roots of these mystery schools. And it's not a surprise then that we'll actually find Hermeticism in things such as Kabbalah and its various different forms, also in the tarot spreads. And it's also been a major influence behind a lot of 19th century movements, such as Freemasonry, Golden Dawn, and underpins a lot of modern witchcraft and magical practices as well. It's also drawn upon with the modern trend for manifesting, but from what I've seen, it's very much kind of light touch without practitioners necessarily really going quite deep into the roots of this and what's actually the meaning underneath the surface. So there are 7 main principles, and this is a distillation of the overall Hermetic philosophy. So, there's nuances and we can explore these, we could explore them forever. But for the sake of today, what we're going to do is just do a little overview of what these look like. And the idea is that you can apply them in your life too. The first principle is mentalism. The Kabbalion states, the all is mind, the universe is mental. We might want to think of this a bit like panpsychism, which literally means pan, everything, psyche. So it's all in the psyche. It's all in consciousness, essentially. That there's nothing in this world, in this reality of ours, that isn't born of consciousness. After all, that which is experienced is intimately woven within the experiencer itself. And the other 6 principles dovetail into this, and you'll begin to see why as we go along. Also, consider that there's nothing in our human endeavor that hasn't been born out of an idea, a thought, imagination, a dream, some kind of lived experience. Every kind of artwork is an expression of someone's lived experience, of their emotion, of their understanding, of their quests or questions. And then everything in science is the same. Everything in science has been born through the lens of consciousness, because science is the art of measurement. And of course, there has to be a measurer in order to measure anything. And when we think of, sending spacecraft to the moon, then of course, that was only possible because someone dreamed of what might it be like to go to the moon, and then somebody thought through and worked out the physics, and then somebody planned and designed and then created the engines that could make it possible, and so on and so on. So here's an example of all is mind. Number 2, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. You may be quite familiar with this maxim already, because it's used quite often, probably more often than the others, across kind of modern parlance, especially when we're talking about things like manifestation or transformation. And the way to think about this, nice and simply, is to consider that the principles that create and control and allow something to unfold on one level is the same on another. So, for example, the atoms at the very kind of fundamental level of what we are physically could be thought of as having the nucleus and the electrons whizzing around. So that would be on the microcosm, the small level, the below level, and on the above level, the macrocosm, you might think of the sun, our solar system, with the planets moving around the sun. We might also think about the golden ratio, and that's the mathematical propensity for nature to move in such a way that it forms the swirl in the inside of a sunflower, or how a shell forms in that swirling, beautiful shape that it does. And then consider that on the macrocosm is same as how a galaxy is unfolding. So this is very much the principle of as above, so below as above, but it also works with as within, so out with, and in every other kind of direction and dimension that you can think of too. Number 3, vibration. Kabbalion states, nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. And we can see this is so that there is actually nothing in our reality that's ever completely still. Even the things that seem solid to us, like our phones in our hands, our desks, the trees, everything around us may seem solid, but that's just because they're just moving at such a slow rate that it's imperceptible to us. A good example of this principle is if you were to think of musical instruments. And if you're in a room full of musical instruments and you pick one up and you play a perfect note on that instrument, the corresponding note on those other instruments, if they're perfectly tuned, would also start to vibrate. You might know this from when you walk into a room and you can feel the vibe, or when you meet someone and you just kind of know whether your energy, your vibration matches or not. A great example of vibration can be seen in cymatics, something we'll go into another time. But this is where certain sounds will create certain mathematical patterns in a material sense. So if you put sand over a speaker and you play certain music, you will start to see the sand form into those different shapes. Number 4, polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. A Kabbalion. And paradox is so important to always hold in mind when you're working with the mystery schools, because everything is fundamentally paradoxical, and knowing that all paradoxes can be resolved and that is the paradoxical nature of the paradox itself is actually fundamental. Hence the name of my book, Ironic Fundamentalism. It's all about that. So polarity, think about it, North Pole, South Pole. Think about emotions, think about, love and disinterest. Not love and hate, they're not actually opposites. That's a bit of a tricky one. Think of light and shadow, think of success and failure. All of these things are in polarity to one another, but they're not separate from one another. They're actually connected through degrees of similarity or degrees of difference. They're a spectrum. And this is super important when you're working on changing self-limiting beliefs or working with anxious thoughts. It's really important to remember, in particular, this principle that for every thought you have that says, oh, I'm going to be terrible at this, how about you look at the opposite thought that says, I'm going to be amazing at this? and recognize that there's every kind of degree of difference in between available to you. Okay, number 5, rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. And rhythm compensates. Kabbalion. And we know this. When we are thinking about rhythm, there are rhythms of life that we all have our own rhythms in life, but then there are rhythms that we all attune to. So things like, waking up at certain times, going to bed at certain times. We're in tune with the rhythm of the rise and fall of the sun in our day-to-day routines. When two people come together to dance to a piece of music, they may be dancing separately. When they come together, they begin to share a certain kind of rhythm. More people who get involved, and they're all sharing a kind of rhythm. Think of perhaps people at a concert all starting to move together as though they are one mind, bringing us back to that first principle again. And rhythm as well. When we think of tides, everything rises on the tide and everything falls on the tide, and everything does that together. You're not going to have multiple boats on the sea where only one of them rises. They will all rise together and they will all fall together. There is a rhythm. And also we think about the pendulum swing. Sometimes we think maybe socially, politically, when things move one way, really far to the right, then it just means that actually it's got just the same potential to fall all the way back the other way. And the real master of Hermetic principles, if you have mastery of these things, then these principles don't work against you. You know how to compensate for them. That's the key to this, is that if your pendulum in your life is swinging to the right, and that's not good for you, then actually having the wider perspective and the ability to work with all of the principles together allows you to actually become master of that pendulum swing rather than subject to it. And that's really what we're aiming for here. Okay, number 6, cause and effects. So every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law, and that's this law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. So again, here the Kabbalion is telling us that for everything that we do, there is a reaction, right? So this is a really tuning into the power of choices, the power of being informed, the power of going with what's truthful and authentic. And when it talks about everything happening according to law, it's talking about this exact principle here, cause and effect, and all of the other principles or laws of Hermeticism. When we see chances but a name for the law not recognized, this is really just where people have no mastery of the Hermetic principles, and they feel that they are subject to things and that they have no inherent power, that they have no will that they can exert in any particular circumstance. And what the Kabbalion and what Hermetic philosophy is telling us is actually we could be the causal agent and not just the receiver of the effect. So when we're experiencing the effects of something, then actually we can turn this around. We can turn this into something where we can reclaim the agency and be causal in any particular moment. And 7, gender. And I think this is so important and so clear today in the shift in our culture and the shift in societal thinking, where the pendulum has swung from one side, really swinging the other way now, that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine. Gender manifests on all planes. So what is important to identify here is that we are all and each both genders within ourselves. Some more with a masculine energy to feminine ratio, and some the other way around. Some of us feel like we're very balanced between the two. Some of us feel that we are more like one than the other. But being one without any form of the other is an illusion, as this principle explains to us. And this is actually the origin of marriage. Marriage was originally, in its mystical form, an alchemical process. An alchemical process meaning that it's one of transformation. So this was bringing the masculine and the feminine together in unity within the individual, within the person. It wasn't so much about bringing a man and a woman per se together. It was about bringing the masculine and the feminine forms into one being. As so above in the macrocosm, where the divine, the Godhead, the universe, however you want to think about this idea, is both the unification, perfect balance of feminine and masculine energies, because these are the creative principles behind procreation. And we also see this all around us in the animal and plant world too. In nature, many species are actually hermaphroditic, both genders, both sexes even. And we find this in many species of oak tree, for example. As the psychoanalysts, such as Jung, would talk about gender as being our animus, not anima, and the aim of the work, the personal development work, is to integrate, is to create individuation, to create wholeness within the individual. And we can see this here. Here's an example. So this is phi. This is the mathematical principle that I mentioned before. This is sacred geometry. And here we have the mathematical underpinning of how we get that spiral in the galaxy, spiral in the sunflower, spiral on a seashell, and how nature essentially creates itself. So this is ultimately the deep wisdom of manifestation creation. Okay, it's how nature creates itself, and we are nature. We are in the position to create ourselves. That is what the true list of manifesting is all about. But what you can see here is that you could start right at the tiny start point of this spiral, the really tight little bit just on the bottom right here. And you can trace the curved line round all the way to the furthest outer edge on the left. And this would actually be considered to be the feminine energetic path. It's taking a curved approach from beginning to the end of this particular portion. And then if you followed the more square angular routes that are here, then you get to the same place. And this is considered to be the masculine energetic principle of how you get from, say, A to B, how you get from conception to creation. And your task now is to think about an issue in your life, a problem, something that's been bothering you. And then what I'd like you to do is to take pen to paper and explore it. Take each principle one at a time and ask yourself, how can I apply this to my problem? And how they might shift you from concept to creation, how this might move you to manifestation. So think of that problem and think of mentalism. Is this born just of your mind? Is this a collective consciousness issue? Where does it come from? Where's it going? Think about correspondence. Think about microcosm, macrocosm on this. Is this just my problem? Is this a bigger systemic problem? What if I was to break it down? What's its essence if I break it down? What if I scale it up? What would it look like? What's the vibe? What's the vibration here? What else is resonating with this issue? Who else is resonating with this? What's their involvement? What's alike? What's not alike? Polarity. Look at the extremes. How does one end actually relate to the other extreme? Think of it as a spectrum and think of all the degrees of difference in between. What about rhythm? Has this occurred before? Is this new? Is this going round in some kind of cycle? Is it repeating? Is it a pattern? Can I see it anywhere else? Think of cause and effect. What am I doing and what am I getting back? What am I not doing and what am I getting back? What am I not doing and what am I not getting back? What am I doing and what am I not getting back? How causal are you actually being, or are you just subject to the effects? And gender, think about it. What approach are you taking here? Is this a particularly feminine approach, a very felt approach, or are you taking a very masculine approach, a very logical, strategic type one? And if it's not working, perhaps look at it from the other gendered perspective. Perhaps think curves over straight lines, or perhaps think straight lines over curves. These are just some examples of how you might apply the 7 principles of Hermeticism into your life on a daily basis. And mastery of this comes with practice because it comes with insight, The more you apply it, the more insight that you gain. And then the next stage, once you have a good grasp of these principles, is to put them into recognizing the full alchemical process of personal transformation. And that's for another time. Let me know what you think. Bye for now.